Marta Bastianelli comes through on her birthday for Team UAE ADQ.
They all hit the deck and they're falling like skittles.
On this week's racing news show, 4 World Tour wins in 24 hours for Bora Hansgrohe. I'll be looking back at the Tour of Romandie and Eschborn Frankfurt, as well as the Festival Elsy Jacobs, Tour of Helas and the Vuelta Asturias, where we saw the best and the worst of Simon Yates as he builds up to the Giro. This week, in the world of racing, we learned that there has never been a better example of adding insult to injury than stage 1 of the Tour of Helas. Eduard Prades thought he'd won, but he hadn't, because Aaron Gate was a couple of minutes up the road, but in celebrating what was actually second place, his saddle fell off. We also learned that Binyam Girmay will remain with Intermarché until at least the end of 2026, having signed a contract extension, and I'm really pleased about that. Intermarché were the team to give him his opportunity in the World Tour, which he's firmly grasped with both hands, and I'm happy that they will reap the inevitable rewards that he will bring them in the coming years. I also cannot wait to see him race the Giro d'Italia. Pink jersey after day 1? It is a definite possibility. Also, check out this video from the team at Eschborn Frankfurt. It's Binyam Mania. I love that. Can you imagine what it's going to be like for him at the Giro d'Italia? Colombian fans have some competition, that's for sure. And finally this week, we learned that we will have a GCN Plus Apple TV app ahead of the Giro d'Italia. More on that later on, but I'm going to kick off with the Tour of Romandie, which started with Ethan Hayter taking his first win in a World Tour race. The Brit flew around the short opening prologue 2 seconds quicker than Rowan Dennis, taking the race leader's jersey in the process. Didn't go to plan for him the following day, though. He was amongst a number of riders caught up in another mass pile-up. Jonas Aguirre and Rigoberto Urán were also involved, and all 3 lost a big chunk of time. The finish was the most enthralling part, I think, of the whole week at Romandie. Rowan Dennis, in the leader's jersey, put in a searing attack on the climb to the finish, and he was oh so close. Dylan Teuns breaking the heart of Dennis in the dying stages there. Urán was forced to abandon with a shoulder injury following his crash that day, but Hayter bounced back in fine style. Hayter doing a silencing of the critics celebration there, which was a bit strange because the criticism has mainly centred around his lack of positioning this year, but that was one of the days where he positioned himself well throughout behind his team. He was up in the mix again the following day, but this time he was out-sprinted by an in-form Patrick Bevan. That marked Israel Premier Tech's 4th win of the 2022 season, 3 of which have come from the New Zealander. And he's coming to the end of his contract this year, so very nice timing for him. The Queen stage, I've got to say, was not the most interesting. That was partly down to a stiff headwind on most of the key parts of the stage, but basically not a lot happened. Ina Rubio made the biggest attack of the day and came close to a stage victory, and if it wasn't for the accelerations of Luke Plapp towards the line, he probably wouldn't have been caught. But he was, and in the sprint to the line, it was quite bizarre. Sergio Higuita accelerated, and his own teammate Alexander Vlasov immediately got onto his wheel. So he had 2 teammates, both sprinting to the line. Higuita even veered to the right slightly, almost taking his teammate out in the process, and then Vlasov posts up and celebrates. Now, I am pretty sure this was a celebration of his teammate's win and his team's 1-2, but since Vlasov was far higher up on GC, it seems strange that Higuita didn't work for him for the extra bonus seconds that he would have taken. Either way, didn't matter in the end because Vlasov romped up the mountain TT on the 6th and final day of the race, quickest at the intermediate time check and quickest to the finish. That was his first and second World Tour career win on the very same day. And in fact, the third for his team in the space of just 24 hours at that point. Surprise of the day, though, was Simon Geschke of Team Cofidis. His best ever result in a pro time trial with second place, and good enough to launch himself 6 places up the GC to the third step of the podium. Fair play to him. Equally impressive, although slightly less surprising, was Gino Maida's third place on the stage, which gave him second on GC. Rowan Dennis, who'd started the day in the lead, had a time trial to forget. He was third at the intermediate check, but then it all unravelled from there. He'd slipped to 22nd by the end of the stage and down to 8th on GC. A special mention, though, has to go to Juan Ayuso, because although he slipped to 4th place from 2nd on that final day, he is only 19 years of age. 4th place in a World Tour stage race, even if it wasn't the best field, is pretty bloody impressive. Chapeau to him too. Now, before we get on to the rest of last week's racing, our big news here at GCN. From tomorrow, you'll be able to use GCN Plus on Apple TV. Now, I know it's been a long time coming, loads of you have been asking for it, and after a lot of hard work from the tech team, it's finally here. And here, importantly, in time for the start of the Giro d'Italia on Friday. Happy days. And I would love your feedback if you do use it, but please do bear in mind this is version 1 and there'll be continuous improvements over the coming months. Now, talking of the Giro d'Italia, a reminder that we have live and on-demand coverage of the whole 3 weeks in all GCN Plus territories except for New Zealand. So if you haven't already signed up, what are you waiting for? Robin McKeown will be in this very studio for the first time, giving his expertise. Sean Kelly and Adam Blythe are back too. Ola Shenowy will be hosting proceedings in front of camera, Rob Hatch behind the mic, and you might even hear and see a bit from me as well. I am mega excited, as you can see and as you'd expect, and I hope that you are too. The Giro never fails to entertain. Our big preview for that race will be out tomorrow, all being well, and there are some really interesting stages this year, not just in the high mountains either. Now, along with the new Apple TV app, we've also made a couple of other updates over the last week. Firstly, the web player has a new look, which should make it easier for you to navigate. And on the app, we've now got a search function, which I'm finding particularly handy if I'm looking for an old race. And as well as being able to watch all of the live racing with a GCN Plus subscription, if you download the free GCN app, you'll also be able to interact with our polls and quizzes, check out route information, results and standings, and read our daily stage previews, which come complete with our inevitably doomed predictions. And as a reminder, all of that fun stuff around the racing is free and does not require a GCN Plus subscription. Over to the Netherlands now, where the 3-day Festival Elsy Jacobs took place last week. Anna Henderson of Jumbo-Visma blitzed around the short opening prologue to take the biggest win of her career so far, ahead of Demi Vollering, no less. She did lose the jersey the following day, though, as SD Works and UAE split the race apart on the climbs. A small group contested the win that day, and it was Marta Bastianelli who took the stage, while second place for Silvia Persico was enough for her to go into the overall lead, just fractions of a second in front of Vollering. And so it all came down to the final stage, a stage that was won solo by Veronica Uers of EF Education Tibco. That was her biggest pro win so far, and it was a move that also catapulted her up to second overall in the GC. Behind her, it was Bastianelli who sprinted to second place, and with no sign of Persico in that group, that was enough to give Bastianelli the title. Pretty impressive when you consider she only came 44th on the opening day's prologue. Meanwhile, in Germany, it was the Eschborn Frankfurt yesterday. The crowds were out in force for what is one of the biggest races in the country, and so there was a fair bit of pressure on Germany's only World Tour team, Bora Hansgrohe. And they duly delivered. Danny van Poppel was the penultimate part of the puzzle, expertly guiding Bennett into the closing couple of 100 metres, with Bennett duly delivering the win. And that's his first win in just under 1 year, which I'm sure comes as a huge relief for him. For Bora Hansgrohe, though, it marked the 3rd World Tour win in a single day, which no team has ever done before, and their 4th win in the World Tour in the space of just 24 hours. Now, I think that Bennett might also need to thank Gaviria a little bit for that win, though. If you look here, the Colombian makes a split-second decision to dart to the left into a small space, firstly ruining the chances of Jasper Philipsen, who was forced to break, and secondly, of Simone Consonni of Cofidis, who also had nowhere to go. Gaviria would end up with second place, unable to come around Bennett, whilst Christoph, who won that race 4 times between 2014 and 2018, was in 3rd. Right, on to what is coming up on GCN Plus this week, and it's not all about the Giro d'Italia. That starts on Friday. We've got the team's presentation live on Wednesday evening. Before that, though, and starting tomorrow, it is the 4 days of Dunkirk, a race which has kept its name despite having been 6 days long for as long as I can remember. Wellens, Delis, Gilbert, Hofstetter and Narsen are amongst the names lining up for that race in northern France. We'll also have highlights of the women's Vuelta Andalusia for you. That runs from tomorrow through to Thursday, so plenty to keep us entertained as we gear up towards the first Grand Tour of the season. Now, one man who is hoping to win that Grand Tour is Simon Yates of Team Bike Exchange, and he was back in action at the Vuelta Asturias at the weekend. But it was a topsy-turvy 3 days for him. He won on stage 1, completely cracked the following day, and then bounced back to win the third and final stage. Now, Yates blamed the lack of power on stage 2 on the heat, saying it was such a big contrast to where he'd been at altitude. The overall winner there was another rider heading to the Giro, Ivan Ramirez Sosa of Movistar, whilst Lorenzo Fortunato was second, Nicolas Ede third. On to the Helas Tour, where the bunch got it wrong on the first day. Aaron Gate had formed part of an early break and ended up winning the stage by almost 2 minutes. And from a GC perspective, that was the end of that. Matteo Moschetti was triumphant on day 2, and then on stage 3, this happened. A mass pile-up on the final corner. A final corner that probably shouldn't have been there, given that it was a likely sprint finish. Now, emerging unscathed for the win was Lennart Turgels, who many of you will know from the Zwift Racing League. The final 2 stages were dominated by Danes from the BHS team, and Niels Laubrugge taking stage 4 in a sprint, where there was another big crash in the finale, and Emil Tudau taking the 5th and final stage after getting the better of Joe Rosskopf in the line. Now, that one had to be neutralised at the top of the biggest climb of the day due to some pretty atrocious conditions that reduced visibility to nigh on zero. In other news, there's also been a positive update on Amy Pieters. The Dutch woman has been in a coma since a bad crash in Spain at the end of last year, and the lack of news since then has been really rather worrying. However, on the SD Worx website last week, the news came that Amy is now conscious, recognises people around her, and is able to communicate a little non-verbally. Doctors are still unsure as to what the long-term recovery will look like for Amy, but this is definitely a step in the right direction, and we hope to hear more good news soon. Milan Vader, who crashed heavily at the Tour of the Basque Country 3 weeks ago, gave an update on Instagram last week to say that he's basically had to learn everything again since being woken up from an induced coma, but he is now well enough to head home and continue his recovery there. Annemiek van Vleuten broke her wrist in a training accident last Thursday, which did require surgery, but her team have said it won't affect her build-up to the Giro Donne and Tour de France Femmes. And finally, Fabian Cancellara was at the Tour of Romandie last week to announce a new Swiss pro team. He's basically taken ownership of the Swiss Racing Academy, which currently races at continental level, but next year they'll be known as Tudor Pro Cycling and race at a pro-continental level. Right, that is all for this week's Racing News Show, but do not forget to check out our big Giro d'Italia preview show, hopefully out tomorrow, and join us on Friday from 11 AM BST for the start of our Giro d'Italia live coverage. Goodbye for now.